All right, Hebron, can you hear me all right? Excellent. All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Yosef, Yonah, Tzvi, ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen. And to thank Noam Leah Efron for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel and Mordechai Halevi. Our week of learning sponsors, Jack Bennett, in memory of Givati Brigade Lieutenant Asaf Rosenfeld, and our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Pinchas Levine, for the Shlema for Yitzchok ben Chaya Rachel. Also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a really incredible Daf ahead of us today. Today's Daf is Chaf Hey 25, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Chaf Dalid Amud Beis, and we are picking up Ki Tanya Hila Avdam. It's right across from in between Tosas, Mimal, and Shiny. So remember again, we're focusing on a very simple question over here, which is, how was Rabbi Gamliel able to go ahead and make images of the moon? After all, again, isn't there a biblical prohibition to go ahead and create images of Shamashai, the attendants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So the Gemara says, no, the only time you're not allowed to go to make images is when your intention is to serve them. So the Gemara says, Ila Avdam, if you're making something to serve, Afilu Shilshul Katan, even a small little worm. Right? And I was about to say, you're not allowed to serve any type of image. So halacha l'maisa, the ability to go ahead and make something for the purposes of serving it is independent of the type of image you are creating. To which the Gemara says, Einachinami, you're right, Tisanyo. Asher ba'aretz l'rabos harim gvo. Asher ba'aretz l'rabos harim ugvo. So we'll say the pasuk says, don't make an image of anything that's on the earth. That refers to the mountains and the valleys. Yomim, naros, afikim, vigios, all streams, valleys, mitachas, l'rabo shilshul katan. And mitachas, underneath, even the smallest of worms. Obviously, I will say for the purposes of worship, you're not allowed to make any type of image. Vasya gredasa mishari. So, but what about just making something? In other words, I will say the act of creating an image, even if you're not going to worship it, is that permitted? Vatanya, we learned, lo sasun iti, lo sasun kidmus shamashai, Hamshamshimin lefanai. Pasuk says, same pasuk we've been quoting, do not make with me Elohei Kesef, Elohei Zav, gods of gold, gods of silver. What does it mean, don't make with me? So the Gemara is darshaning, don't make the image of those things which serve before me. Kigon, Chamo, Levana, Kochav Mazalos, like the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations. So once again, it would appear that halacha l'maisa, you can't make an image of the moon. So how is Rabbi Gamliel allowed to do this? Shani Rabbi Gamliel, da'acherim asulo. Interesting answer, to which the Gemara says, you're right, Rabbi Gamliel didn't make it himself. He had Gentiles make it for him. So perhaps, again, the prohibition of making these items is dafka what? Is dafka when you're making it yourself. But if a Gentile is going to make it for you, it's not problem. So also what's interesting about this approach is that halacha l'maisa, the Gemara seems to say the issue is actually with the creation of these items, not necessarily the usage. Obviously, worship is going to be asar. But Rabbi Gamliel, who's using it to cross-examine or to examine the witnesses, he can't make it, but once it's made, it's permitted for use. Is that true? Rabbi Yehuda, this is fascinating. But Rabbi Yehuda, as we're going to see, Rashi says, Rabbi Yehuda, Shaisalot Tzura b'tabaso, v'achirim aso, v'amle Shmuel, dinishkele minei. Rabbi Yehuda had a signet ring, and the ring had an image on it. And I both say, why did it have an image on it? He used it as a stamp. So Rabbi Yehuda had a ring that someone else made for him. V'amle Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel said, Rabbi Yehuda, shinina, sharp one, sami eine didan. Literally, some entity means blind the eye, which means do something to ruin the image. In other words, so you see, Shmuel told Rabbi Yehuda, even though someone else made this ring for him, you have to change the image. You can't walk around with an image. So the Gemara says, no, that was different. Hasam chosma bolet. In Rabbi Yehuda's ring, the image protruded. if that makes sense, right? The image was raised, right? The image was raised. Umishum chashada. So here's the problem. To walk around with a ring with a raised image causes a person to be suspect of idolatry, worshiping idolatry. Rashi says, Mishum chashada shelo yomru avodah zara hi lo. So what Shmuel was saying to Rabbi is to walk around with a ring with a raised image just raises suspicions. It looks like avodah zara. Kidisanya, because we'll say, as we learned, this is really fascinating. And the Shulchan Aruch quotes this. Tabas. Let's see, so you have a signet ring, and the ring has an image of a person, image of something, right? Tabas chosmo bolet asr lahanicha umutar lachtamba. Listen to this. If you have a ring that has a raised image, you're not allowed to wear it, but you are allowed to use it as a seal, right? You must remember again how they used to seal letters. You take wax, you take the signet ring, and you push it in. So if you have a ring with a raised image, you can't wear that ring. Why can't you wear it? You can't wear it because chashash, it looks like avodah zara, like you're worshiping avodah zara, but you can use it to seal letters. Why can you use it to seal letters? Because halacha l'maaseh creates a depressed image. The only problem we're going to see is with raised images. So if in the seal it creates it, because right, if the image on the ring is raised, that means when you put it into the wax, it creates a depressed image. So that's permitted. Chosmo shokea. If however you have a ring with a depressed image, mutar lahanicha, you're permitted to wear it, right? Because since it's not a raised image, it doesn't look like avodah zara, v'asr lachtomba. But interestingly enough, you can't seal a letter with it. Why can't you seal a letter with it? Because then it creates a raised image on the letter. Fascinating. So the Gemara says, but one second, are we concerned that halacha l'maisa, that people are going to do things that look like avodah zara? In other words, do we go to that extent to say you can't wear the ring with a raised image because Rabbi Yehuda looks like you're worshiping avodah zara? Vaha, listen to this story. Vaha hahibe kinishta deshaf v'yaseh v'narda. Both say there was a shul. The name of the shul was Shaf v'Yaseh. It was the young Israel of Shaf v'Yaseh of Narda, right? Right? So there's a whole machlokes says exactly why it was called Shaf v'Yaseh. Rashi says over here, Shaf v'Yaseh v'Narda, Makom hu v'yesh posrin shecharav v'chazar v'nivneh. So both say Shaf v'Yaseh, Rashi says Shaf means destroyed, v'Yaseh resettled. It was a shul that was destroyed and rebuilt, like the Churva shul, right? Shul that was destroyed and rebuilt. So the Gemara says, Dahava be andarta. In that shul, there was a statue of the king, of the Babylonian king. Vahavu Aili Rav Shmuel, Vahavu Shmuel Halevi, Umaslasa. And the great Gedolim of Bavel davened in that shul. And yet we see that what? No one was concerned that it's going to look like they're worshipping Avodah Zarah. So it sounds like from over here, you see that for upstanding religious citizens, you don't have to wear something that looks like everyone knows they're not worshiping idolatry. To which the Gemara says, no. Rabbim shiny. That's different. When something is in the public sphere, people know that the statue of the king is there. The king legislated, okay, and it's in the Rabbim. Everyone knows the Rabbim is not worshiping Avodah Zarah. They know that, right? So the only time that there's a chashash Avodah Zarah apparently is by a yochid, is by an individual. But by the Rabbim, we're not concerned. So I will say, but Rabbi Gamliel was an individual. So again, if there does exist this concern about something that looks like idolatry, then how is Rabbi Gamliel able to go ahead and create these images? To which the Gemara says, Kevan de Nasihu, Shchichi Rabbim Gabe. This is fascinating. Rabbi Gamliel was like the Rabbim. He was like the Rabbim. Right? Why was he like the Rabbim? Ultimately, again, because everyone came to him. So I will say, this is the first answer the Gemara gives. Is that, actually, it's already the fourth answer the Gemara gives. But the Gemara suggests Rabbi Gamliel was like the Rabbim. By the Rabbim, there's no chashash of Avodah Zarah, and therefore he could build the images. Okay. So another possibility is deprakim hava. These images were made of pieces and were constantly assembled and disassembled. So the Gemara posits over here that the prohibition to make images is only when they remain in a state of assembly. But if they are constantly put together and broken down, there is no problem of creating them. The other possibility is, why did Rabbi Gamliel make this? Why did he make this? We'll say it wasn't just to question the witnesses. It was also to what? To teach people the halachos of Kiddush HaChodesh. Uksiv los, and the pasuk says, Pasuk says, "Lo silmad la'asos kisavos hagoyim ha'im." So this Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to Klal Yisrael as they're about to enter into Eretz Yisrael. Do not learn from the ways of these nations, from the abominations of the nations, to conduct yourself like them. Which we darshan, lo silmad la'asos. You shouldn't learn their ways in order to practice their ways. Aval atolomid lahavin ulahoros. But you are permitted to learn in order to instruct. So both say, by the way, just an aside. Obviously, you're not allowed to worship Avodah Zarah, and you're not allowed to learn about Avodah Zarah for the purposes of what? Worshipping. But you are permitted to learn about Avodah Zarah for the purposes of understanding what you can and cannot do. So too, the Gemara says over here that since Rabbi Gamliel had gone ahead and created these items for the purposes of teaching and learning, therefore there was no issue. So Rabbi say this concludes the sugya. What I want to point out to you is as follows. This discussion regarding going ahead and making images is a big discussion halacha. This can be found in Yeridea, Simin Kuf Mem Aleph. So very quickly, in Kuf Mem Aleph Sif Dalid, the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: Asr l'tzayer tzura shemad shchina kigon dalid panim b'hadi adadi v'chei tzuras srafim v'afanim malach yeshras kin tzuras adam levado kol elu asr la'asosam afilu heim lenoi v'im ovei kochavim asam asr la'ashosim. So both say, so the Shulchan Aruch paskins that halacha l'maisa, you can't make images. You can't make images. You can't make images of the sun, of the moon, of the malachim, of a person, of the four-faced throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But says the Shulchan Aruch, B'amed Ramamurim biboletas. When is that true? With a raised image. With a raised image. Aval b'shokas, but what we'll call with a depressed image. Ka'osam sha'ar g'mabegesh v'metzarim b'kosal b'simanim mutter la'asosam. But again, if it's not a raised image, then it's permitted. However, he says, "V'tzuras chama ulevana v'kochavim aser ben bolatas ben shokas." Shulchan Aruch paskins, but images of the sun, the moon, the stars are going to be aser no matter what. So I'll say, we don't have time to go into this right now, but obviously this sparks a whole discussion, right? What does one do about artwork, or for that matter, again, what does one do about children's toys, right? You're allowed to have a three-dimensional child, right? So obviously we do. So there's a lot of halachic discussion over here about this. But again, not for now. Say he's going to put it on our list of future topics. Yaradea, Simin Kuf Mem Aleph. When you have a few moments, you could take a look there. Fascinating discussions. Says the Mishnah, supposed to listen to this. There was once a story. Two witnesses showed up and they said, in the morning, we saw the moon in the east, and in the evening, we saw it in the west. Now, what's happening over here? What they're testifying about is as follows. They're saying, in the morning, we saw the old moon, quote unquote, the old moon in the east, and that night we saw the new moon in the west. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan Manuri, Eidei Sheker. Rabbi Yochanan Manuri says, they're lying. They're lying. Now, how do we know they're lying? Rashi says over here, top of Chafei, Eidei Shekerim, Dekaim Alon Esrim V'Arba Shai Mechasi Sarah. Because Rashi says, we learned this on Daf Chaf, that there is a period of about 24-hour period where the moon is not visible at all. So therefore, to go ahead and say that they saw the old moon, so to speak, in the morning in the east and the new moon in the evening in the west, they're lying because that's impossible. That's impossible. The moon is not visible for 24 hours. Listen to this. Kishebal Yavne, when they came to Yavne, remember again, Yavne is where the Sanhedrin relocated to, right? Even before the Beis Rabbi Gamliel accepted their testimony. Again, we'll see exactly why that is. Weiter. So the Gemara says, next case. Vod. Listen to this next case. Two witnesses came along and they said, we saw the moon on the night 30, but we could not find the moon again on night 31. So we'll say, obviously, you must be talking about where night 31 was a totally clear night, right? So this was their testimony. We saw the moon on night 30, but on night 31, no one is able to go ahead and see the moon, right? So what's the halacha? So if you look at Rashi, so we'll say, so again, witnesses came along, we saw the moon on night 30, okay, Everybody's waiting to see the moon, therefore, on night 31, and no moon to be found. What's the halacha? The Kiblan Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel accepted the testimony of these witnesses. So Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenis Ede Shekerhein. Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenis said, Rabbi Gamliel, how can you accept them? They're liars. After all, how do we know? Heich mi'idin ala isha sheyalda ulamacha kreise ben shineha. This would be like testifying, Mazel Tov, a woman gave birth, but yet the next morning you see that she's clearly pregnant. Obviously, what does that mean? What does that mean? That whoever told you she gave birth lied. So again, how could they say they saw the moon on night 30 where there's no moon to be seen on night 31? They're obviously lying. Amul Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenus, Roa ani esteorach. I think you're right. I think you're right. Rabbi Gamliel made a mistake. And I think at the end of the day, the witnesses must have been mistaken about what they saw on night number 30. It clearly wasn't the moon, because if they were right, the moon should have been visible on night 31 as well. So therefore, Rabbi Yoshua says, Rabbi Dosa, I agree with you. But say, listen to this story. This is the famous Maisa. Shalach lo Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel will say, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, sent a message to Rabbi Yoshua. It will say, there's a lot of stories, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua. So it says, Rabbi Gamliel, goes Rani alecha shetavo esli b'makelcho ma'asecha b'yom kippurim. So now remember again, what was about to unfold was as follows. Rabbi Gamliel accepted the testimony of the witnesses who said that the moon was apparent on night number 30, which means, remember, this is for Chodesh Tishrei. For Chodesh Tishrei. So therefore again, according to Rabbi Gamliel, Elul will be a chasir, a 29-day month, and therefore again, Tishrei will begin on day number 30. Rabbi Yoshua did not agree with Rabbi Gamliel. He felt it should be a malay, a 30-day month, and Tishrei should not begin until when? Day 31, which means that effectively, Rabbi Yoshua would have observed Yom Kippur 1 day later than Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel gets wind of this, says, Yoshua, I command you to show up before me on Yom Kippur, on what would be Yom Kippur according to your calculations, with your walking staff and with your money bag. He was essentially telling him to do what? To essentially violate the day that he felt was Yom Kippur. So we'll say, the Imre Emes says, why? I don't understand. If he's trying to get Rabbi Yeshua to show that his calculations are wrong, and the 11th what his Yom Kippur is really the 11th, what should Rabbi Yeshua to do? Right? Eat. Come, we're going to have bagels. Right? So the Imre Emes says something amazing. That Rabbi Gamliel needed Rabbi Yoshua to demonstrate his subservience, but Rabbi Gamliel also understood, see, if you notice, by the way, the things that he asks him to do are potentially issues of muktzah and tchum, both of which are d'Rabbanans, not d'Oraisas. He wanted to be respectful of Rabbi Yoshua's opinion, and he wanted to be respectful of Rabbi Yoshua's stature, and he did not want to do something that would cause Rabbi Yoshua immeasurable harm. In other words, if you want to fast on the 11th, you could fast on the 11th. That's fine. You can fast whenever you want, except Shabbos and Yom Tov. But we're going to see Rabbi Gamliel needed to do this in order to preserve the integrity of the calendar. So the Gemara goes right to the Gemara says, Halachu matzah, Rabbi Akiva Meitzer. Rabbi Akiva, so I will say, obviously you can imagine Rabbi Yoshua is very tzubrachen, as they say, right? Very broken, because after all, the Nasi, Rabbi Gamliel, just told him to violate what according to him is Yom Kippur. The day is going to be Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Akiva finds him, and Rabbi Yeshua is very upset. Amar lo yesh li lilmod shekal ma she'as Rabbi Gamliel asui. So we'll see exactly who's talking to who. But he said to him, we can learn from here, anything that Rabbi Gamliel says is done. In other words, Rabbi Gamliel's word is final and authoritative. Shene emar, eile moadei Hashem mikrai kodesh, asher tikru'u osam. The pasuk vests the Sanhedrin with the ultimate power to go ahead and declare the new month. When are the moadei Hashem? Asher tikru'u osam. Whenever Beis Din says they are. Bein bizmanon, bein shelo bizmanon. Einli ela moados elu. Right? And we'll say, essentially what Rabbi Akiva was saying to Rabbi Yoshua was, listen, the power of the calendar is handed over to the Sanhedrin. And once the Sanhedrin makes a decision, the truth is, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, whether it doesn't make a difference. Whatever they say becomes objective truth. Bala eats Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. So Rabbi Yeshua is still a little bit depressed. He comes to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. Amar lo, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkin says, Yeshua, don't be upset. Because if we are going to second guess the authority of the Beis Din of Rabbi Gamliel, first wide line. Then we have to go back and question the authority of every single Beis Din all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Shneimar, Vaya'al Moshe v'Aaron v'Nadav v'Avihu v'shivim miziknei Yisrael. This is so fascinating. The pasuk says, Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders ascended. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, why doesn't the Torah tell us the names of the 70 elders? Right? Isn't it interesting? Why not list their names? The Torah goes through so many genealogies and so many lists of names. Tell us who the 70 elders are to teach us an incredible lesson. To teach us, Elalamed, Shekol Shlosha Ushlosha Sha'amdu Beis Al Yisrael. Anytime we have an organized Beis Din, it literally means anytime 3 people are organized as the Beis Din for Klal Yisrael, Harehu Kabeis Dino Shal Moshe. They are given the authority of the Beis Din of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, when we say any three people, don't get excited. It's not the next time you sit down for Ataras Nadar and you're going to start making takanas and gzerus, right? Right? But what it means is on an organized communal level, and again, especially a reference to the Sanhedrin, what they're saying is the reason the Torah does not go ahead and listening to the Shivim Zakenim is for one simple reason. It doesn't matter what their names are. Because we're going to explain this. If we list the names, you would say, he was a gadol, he was a gadol. This guy, he's not a gadol. So it's to teach us, Beis Din is vested with authority. And that authority in certain matters, not in all matters, but in certain matters, is absolute. And one of the areas where that authority is absolute is in Kiddush HaChodesh, in the calendar. So Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus, who was the original person who disagreed with Rabbi Gamliel, says to Rabbi Yeshua, don't be upset. Rabbi Gamliel's right, we're wrong. And even if we think we're right, we're really wrong. And even if somehow we're actually right, we're still wrong. Sounds like marriage, right? But Lamaisa, right? At the end of the day, we are wrong, right? Rabbi Gamliel has the absolute authority. Rabbi Gamliel is in charge, and therefore whatever he says, so don't be upset. You're not violating Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is when Rabbi Gamliel ultimately says it is. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, isn't that beautiful, the story is? Not la makla ma'osa biyado, v'halach liyavna it Rabbi Gamliel biyom shechal Yom Kippurim lios b'chashbono. So I will say, Rabbi Yeshua listens, and Rabbi Yeshua humbles himself, and he takes his walking staff, he takes his money back, he goes to Yavne, to Rabbi Gamliel, on what according to his calculation was Yom Kippur. So according to his Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Gamliel says, Rabbi Yeshua, Amad, Rabbi Gamliel, he stood up as a respect to Rabbi Yeshua. V'nashka arosho, he kissed Rabbi Yeshua on his head. Amar lo, bo b'shalom Rebbe v'talmidi. Welcome, my Rebbe, my teacher, and my student. Rebbe b'chachma, you are my Rebbe in wisdom. Again, we'll discuss what that means. You are my Rebbe in wisdom. V'talmidi shekibalti dvar, and you are my student because you accepted my words. But we'll say an incredible, just an overwhelming story. But we'll say also, sometimes one of the most difficult things, especially societally in general, you see that there's a general kind of throwing off of the yoke of authority on anything and everything. That's the societal trend. And it's incredible because Yiddishkeit doesn't work that way, right? Yiddishkeit allows for an incredible amount of autonomy, but at the end of the day, the system remains intact because of deference to authority. What we see over here, again, obviously not in everything, but in certain core things, which are absolutely essential to the continuity of Klal Yisrael, an ability to bend our individual knee to the will of Chazal, right? And to the will of the Rabbanon. Ultimately, again, they have a wisdom, they possess an insight and a power that they need to have in order to maintain the continuity of the system. And here you see the struggle. And by the way, it's very affirming because we all struggle with authority in different ways at different times. And Rabbi Yeshua was struggling with it also. And by the way, it took Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua, and not Rabbi Yeshua, but Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus, to kind of calm him down, to be able to accept the authority of Rabbi Gamliel. But without that deference to authority, the fundamental fabric of Yiddishkeit begins to unravel. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tanya, Amna Rabbi Gamliel lechachamim. So we'll say we're going back now for just a moment. So Rabbi Gamliel said to the Chacham, Kach mikublani. So we'll say, remember, let's go back to the first story in the Mishnah. What was the first story in the Mishnah? Witnesses said, we saw the old moon in the east in the morning and the new moon in the west in the evening. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, they're lying. Rabbi Gamliel accepted them. How could Rabbi Gamliel accept them? Tanya Rabbi Gamliel Chacham, Kach mikublani beis aviyaba. I have a tradition from my grandfather's home. Pamim sheba ba'aruka, pamim sheba b'kitzara. That the moon doesn't always follow the same pace of trajectory. Sometimes, quote unquote, the moon moves faster, sometimes it moves slower. So the Gemara says, Am Rav Yochanan, my time in the Rebbe, the Chsiv quotes the pasuk over here from Tehillim, Asa yarech lamoadim shemesh yadam mivo'o. Interesting enough, the way the dash in the pasuk is fine. He made the moon for its appointed times, but the sun, we know its journey, or its coming. Shemesh hu diyadam mivo'o. The sun is predictable. Yareach lo yadam mivo'o. But the moon's trajectory is not as predictable. So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel said, although you're right, more often than not, there is this 24-hour period in between the old moon and the new moon. Rabbi Gamliel felt that sometimes the moon could be a little bit unpredictable, and is it possible to see the old moon in the morning in the east and the new moon in the morning in the evening in the west? Maybe not probable, but certainly possible. Rabbi Chia chazia l'sihira davakai b'tzafra de'esrim v'tisha. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Chia saw the moon right in the morning of the 29th, right in the morning of the 29th day. Okay, Rashi says the chazi l'sihara yishana. He quote unquote saw the old moon. The old moon on the morning of the 29th. What did he do? Shakal kala pasuk bay. He took a clod of dirt and he threw it at the moon. Amar li arta ba'inan lekadushebach va'at kayamas hacha. We need you tonight, not this morning. Zil ichsi, go away. So I'll say what Rabbi Chia was saying over here. He was obviously engaging in a public and a demonstrative display because he did not want anyone to get confused by the sighting of the moon of the 29th and potentially confuse it with the new moon. So it appears that he made a little bit of like this public spectacle of throwing dirt at the moon. Get out of here, moon, right? We don't need you today. We need you tonight. So therefore, no one can get confused. Amle Rav Rabbi Chia. We'll say a beautiful Gemara. Zil le'in tav. The kadshe. So we'll listen to this. So Rabbi said to Rabbi Chia, so we'll say, so now this is a continuation of the same story. So Rabbi said to Rabbi Chia, go to Ein Tav, that was the name of a place, the kadshe liyarcha, and go and be mekadesh the chodesh there. There. V'salach lisimna, and v'shalach lisimna, and send me a sign that you are successful. David Melech Yisrael Chai B'Kayim. So we'll say, what's going on over here? Take a look at Rashi. La'arta ba'ina l'kidushech, tzrichen anu lasos halayla yomtiv shal Rosh Hashana, l'chaser es elul, u'la'ayim ala idim olomar ra'inu bizmana l'kadsho, l'machar, va'afa pi shlo ra'u l'fi shaya ibar ha'chodesh, doches m'kipurim eitzel Shabbos. So we'll say, Rashi understands this over here to mean that this is actually a reference. This was a reference to Rosh Hashana. This was Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. See, interestingly enough, so they wanted to go ahead. So Rabbi Chia was seeing the moon on the 29th, and meanwhile, again, they needed to declare Rosh Chodesh that evening. Look at Rashi, next Rashi, Va'at kayam asacha, vimtei niris arbis shuvlo ikatra asachodesh lamachar kidamar. So say, just let me frame what's happening over here. You see, the Gemara is operating with the assumption that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is correct, which is that what? There is always 24 hours in between the appearance of the old moon and the new moon. 24 hours. So what's the problem? So Rabbi Chia is very uptight. Why is he uptight? Because the old moon is appearing the morning of the 29th, which means that people are going to disregard any sighting that they see when? The night of the 30th. But remember, they wanted to declare Elul a 29-day month. Because Rashi points out, again, Rashi's understanding over here that it's Rosh Hashana, and they didn't want Yom Kippur to come next to Shabbos. So Rabbi Chia is very upset because now people saw the moon the morning of the 29th, and therefore they will assume that you cannot be Mekadesh the Chodesh that night. So what does Rabbi tell Rabbi Chia? Zil la'in tav. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Rashi says, Zil la'in tav v'kitshe doi chaya shel yiraninu alav b'nei iro kishi katshena l'machar lefi shera hayishana kol yom chavtes V'silek tlunosa me'alai. Shabbos, listen to this. So what does Rabbi tell Rabbi Chia? This is incredible. So, right, Rabbi Chia saw the moon in his city on the morning of the 29th. Generally, we accept the premise that there has to be 24 hours between the old moon and the new moon. But they needed to declare Rosh Chodesh that night. There was going to be a new moon that night, and they wanted Elul to be a 29-day month, so that, again, Tishrei could start on day number 30. So that, again, according to Rashi, Yom Kippur and Shabbos shouldn't come next to each other. The problem is, Rabbi Chia could not declare the new moon, could not be a witness in his city, because everyone already saw the moon, the old moon, that morning. So what does Rabbi say to Rabbi Chia? Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Zil le'ein tab. Go somewhere else where no one saw the moon the morning of the 29th. Sight the moon there. Declare Rosh Chodesh over there, because you can declare Rosh Chodesh wherever you have an assembled Beis Din. Declare Rosh Chodesh in Ein Tab, and send me a message back that you were successful. What's the message? Code? David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim, right? That's the Talmudic equivalent of the eagle flies north at midnight, whatever it is, right? David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. I will say, why is it David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim? Why is that? Why is that the code? Rashi says so beautifully. David Melech Yisrael Nimshal Kilevana Shnei Marbo Kisu Kashemesh Negdi Kiarech Yichab. Because David Melech was compared like the moon. Was compared to the moon. So David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim ultimately is the code that the new month has been declared. I will say an incredible story. I will tell you the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says something so beautiful on this piece. He says by this statement that Rabbi said to Rabbi Chia, Zil le'ein tab v'kadshe liyarcha. That he was saying, Baal Shem Tov says, according to Rashi's approach, that this is for Rosh Hashana. Do you want to know what the secret is to preparing for Rosh Hashana? What's the secret to preparing for Rosh Hashana? Zil le'ein tav. Develop an ayin tova. Develop a good eye. You want to go into Rosh Hashanah and be successful? Make sure you view people favorably. Make sure you see the good in people. Make sure you're dan lekaf suchos. Said the Baal Shem Tov, everybody thinks that all you have to do to prepare for Rosh Hashanah is to focus on your ben adam lamakom, your relationship with Hashem. It's not true. Zil le'ein tav. Work on an ayin tov. Work on a good eye. Work on seeing people, seeing the world in a favorable fashion. Be dan lekaf suchos, be machnis archim, all the different things we have to do in order to facilitate human relationships, and then you'll be ready for Rosh Hashanah. I've often thought, they both say the truth is, this is not just the din in Rosh Hashanah, because the Pashup Pshat is that this is not talking about Rosh Hashanah. The Pashup Pshat is talking about any Rosh Chodesh. But maybe the eights of the Baal Shem Tov applies to any Rosh Chodesh. How do you prepare for Rosh Chodesh? Well, it's very important. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev is coming Friday, right? Haba Aleinu Latova. Thursday night, Friday, we feel the energy of Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh is always exciting because new beginnings. How do you prepare for Rosh Chodesh? How do you maximize new beginnings? And Rebbe tells us, Zil le'ein tav. Work on your ben adam lechavero. Work on your ayin tova. We're so quick to see the negative in the other. We're so quick to be judgmental of the other. We're so quick to see the shortcomings of the other. If we would all just work on our ayin tov, all just work on a good eye, on seeing the good in everyone and everything, then we can not only take advantage of Rosh Hashanah, but we can take advantage of the full profundity of every single Rosh Chodesh. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tan Rabbanon, Pamachas niskashu shamayim ba'avim, v'niras dimus lavana be'esrim v'tisha l'chodesh. So one time it happened that it was very cloudy. It was very cloudy, and an image of the moon presented itself in the sky on the 29th. Kisura ma'al Rosh Chodesh, ubikshu Beis Din l'kadsho. So people assume that's the new moon, it's Rosh Chodesh, and Beis Din was ready to declare the new month. Amar Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel said, Kach mikublani mibeis avi abba. This is the Masorah I have. Ein chidusha shel levana, pechusa me'esrim v'tisha yom umechza, ushnei shlishi sha'a v'ayin gimel chalokim. So we'll say, listen to this. So this is fascinating. So they saw the new moon on the 29th. Now, when people saw the new moon on the 29th, they assume, okay, it must be Rosh Chodesh, right? So seeing that the night of the 29th, so they're ready to declare Rosh Chodesh on the 29th. Rabbi Gamliel says, no, I have a Masorah. What's my Masorah? Rosh Chodesh is never less than 29 days, 29 and a half days, 3/4 of an hour, and 73 chalakim from last Rosh Chodesh, which I will say by definition always pushes Rosh Chodesh to at least when? Day 30. Day 30. But Rabbi Gamliel was encountering pushback, because the people said, well, what are you talking about? We see the new moon right now. Something amazing happened. So the Gemara says, Osa hayom mesa imo shel ben Zaza. That day, the mother of Ben Zaza passed away. V'espida Rabbi Gamliel hesped gadol. Rabbi Gamliel delivered a mamish. Hesped gadol doesn't just mean a great eulogy. Hesped gadol in this context means a long eulogy, a very long eulogy. Lo mipnei she'ra'uya lakach, not because she necessarily deserved it. Ela kedei sheyedu ha'am shelo kidshu beis nes hachodesh. So we'll say essentially, what did Rabbi Gamliel do? He stalled. He stalled, right? It was an exceptionally long levaya, so that by the time the levaya was over, there was no time for Bezin to be mekadesh the chodesh. So I will say just a fascinating halacha. Rabbi Gamliel's Masorah, Rosh Chodesh cannot be less than 29 and a half days, 3/4 of an hour, and 73 chalokim from the last molad, right? From the last sighting of the moon, which essentially means you can never declare Rosh Chodesh on day 29. The earliest time to do it is day 30. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Halach Rabbi Gamliel matzah meitzer. So we'll say, so remember again, so Rabbi Yeshua is very depressed and demoralized that Rabbi Gamliel has told him that he has to show up on his Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Akiva finds him. So the Gemara says, Bailahu mi meitzar, Rabbi Akiva meitzar, Rabbi Yeshua meitzar. So we'll say from the story, it's not clear who was upset, right? Was Rabbi Yeshua upset or was Rabbi Akiva upset? So Tashma Desanya, Halach Rabbi Akiva matzah Rabbi Yeshua kishu meitzar. Rabbi Akiva went and he found Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yeshua was depressed. Amar lo, mipnei ma'at hameitz Rabbi Yeshua, why are you upset? Amar lo, Akiva, roi lo sheyipa lemita yud beis chodesh val yigzar alav gezerazu. Well, says incredible. Rabbi Yeshua said, I would rather become ill for 12 months and be bedbound than to have to honor this request from Rabbi Gamliel. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua was so upset that he was going to have to show up with his walking staff and his money bag on what was, according to his calculations, Yom Kippur. He said, I would have rather suffered sickness than have to violate this halacha. Amar le Rebbe, tarsheni lomar lefanecha davar echad shili maratani. So Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yeshua, Rebbe, do you give me permission to tell over something that you taught me? Amar lo emar. So Rabbi Yeshua said, Rabbi Akiva, yes, tell me. Amar lo, harehu omer, atem gimel pamim. Rabbi said, the pasuk says, atem, by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? By Moshe and his Beis Din, 3 times. Atem. Why does it say Atem in reference to Moshe and his Beis Din 3 times? And all of this is in the context of the Yomim Tovim. Which I will say, remember again, we've seen from these sugis, whenever you see Yomim Tovim is always a reference to what? Kiddush HaChodesh, because there is no Yom Tiv without Kiddush HaChodesh. So it says Atem 3 times in the context of Yom Tiv / Kiddush HaChodesh. What does it teach us? Atem afilu shogigin, atem afilu mezidin, atem afilu mutin. And Rabbi Akiva says the drashas teach us, atem, you are vested with the authority to declare the new month, even if you are mistakenly incorrect. Atem, you are vested with the authority to declare Rosh Chodesh, even if you are intentionally incorrect. And atem, you are vested with the authority to make Rosh Chodesh, even if you are mistaken in your declaration. In other words, Rabbi Akiva was teaching Rabbi Yeshua, the declaration of the new month by the Sanhedrin is absolute. Absolute. And even if we know that they're absolutely mistaken, right? Even though they made a mistake, right? They made a mistake, nevertheless, the designation and the declaration holds. So what Rabbi Akiva was saying to Rabbi Yeshua was, Rabbi, don't be upset. Their power in this area is absolute. There is no second opinion in this. So because their power is absolute, your cheshbon is wrong. So B'lashon hazeh amar lo Akiva nechamtani. This is so beautiful. So Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Akiva, Akiva, you have consoled me. Akiva, you have consoled me. Also very reminiscent of Lashon at the end of Maseches Makos as well. This was Rabbi Akiva's kach, Rabbi say. Rabbi Akiva possesses this dual strength, right? The ability, number 1, to see hope and optimism even in the darkest of situations. And number 2, the ability to bring nechama. Right? Sometimes the greatest gift a person could have in life is the ability to make someone else feel better in the midst of a difficult circumstance, right? To be a consoling personality. And sometimes, again, it's just being an attentive ear. Sometimes it's knowing what to say or knowing what not to say. But you see that Rabbi Akiva's greatest accomplishment is one of his greatest accomplishments is the ability to provide nechama, the ability to provide consolation where it was necessary. So beautiful. So remember again, Rabbi Yeshua, although interesting, according to the Braisa, so Rabbi Yeshua says, Akiva, you've consoled me, yet he still goes to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. And he says, so Rabbi Dosa, this is the conversation. Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus says to Rabbi Akiva, tell me, Rabbi, why is it that the name of the 70 elders is not mentioned in the Torah? Shelo Yomar Adam Ploni Kimoshe va'Aaron Ploni Kinadav Aviyu Ploni Ke'eldad Umeidad. So we'll say, because a person should not say, see, the problem with listing the names is you're going to say, oh, these are the kind of people who are fit to be on a Sanhedrin, because they're like Moshe and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. V'omer Shmuel Ela'am Hashem asher ases Moshe v'es Aaron. V'omer v'yishlach Hashem es Yerubbaal v'es Bidon v'es Yiftach v'es Shmuel. So let's analyze this pasuk. So Yerubbaal, both say, who's Yerubbaal? Ze Gidon. Right? Gidon is one of the Shoftim. V'lama nikra shmo Yerubbaal. Why was he called Yerubbaal if his name was Gidon? Sha'asa meriva and Baal, because he picked a fight with Baal. Baal was in idolatry. Right? So he was called Yerubbaal because he fought against idolatry. So Bidon, who's Bidon? Ze Shimshon. That's reference to Shimshon. V'lama nikra shmo Bidon. Why is he called Bidon? Da'asi midan. Because he came from the tribe of Dan. Yiftach, who's Yiftach? Kim Ashma'o, right? Yiftach is Yiftach from Navi. So the Gemara says, Va'omer Amud Beis, Va'omer Moshe va'Aaron b'Kohanav, Ushmuel b'Korei Shemo. So we'll say, so just to point out what's happening over here. If you look at Rashi, last Rashi in Amud Aleph, Rashi says, Va'omer Hashem asher asas Moshe v'es Aaron, Shmuel hanavi Amar li Yisrael Kodesh Baruch Hu, Aslam Nisim Aidei Shisha Zekinim Halalu, Moshe v'Aaron Yerubbaal u'Bedon v'Yiftach u'Shmuel. So we'll say, so this is Shmuel speaking to the nation, and Shmuel says, HaKodesh Baruch Hu affected miracles through these 6 people, right? Through Yerubbaal, Bidon, Yiftach, Shmuel, Moshe, Aaron. Okay, these 6 people, HaKodesh Baruch Hu used as his agents to affect miracles. Amud Beis, V'omer, Moshe v'Aaron b'Kohanav, Ushmuel b'Korei Shemo. And yet the pasuk says every week you say in Kabbalah Shabbos, Moshe v'Aaron b'Kohanav, Moshe and Aaron in their priesthood, Ushmuel b'Korei Shemo, and Shmuel was amongst those who called out the name of Hashem. So what does this mean, Abosai? Take a look at Rashi once more. V'omer b'Sefer Tehillim, Moshe Aaron b'Kohanav, Shmuel b'Korei Shemo, Korim al Hashem v'hu ya'anem. Harei sheshakal ha'kasav Shmuel im Moshe v'Aaron. So Abosai, now listen to this. So in this pasuk, so the pasuk equates Shmuel, the Navi Shmuel, with Moshe and Aaron. Ubiksuvim harishon kasav Yerubbaal b'dan v'yiftach im Moshe v'Aaron. Ushmuel. So we'll say, now watch this. There's 2 psukim. The pasuk we just called over Moshe v'Aaron b'kol Shmuel b'korei Shemo equates Shmuel with Moshe and Aaron. The previous pasuk equates Gidon, right? Gidon, Yiftach, and Shimshon with Moshe and Aaron. So what does this come to teach us? So the Gemara says, Shakala Kosov Shloshe Kale Olam Kishloshe Chamurei Olam. So the Torah equates Yiftach, Gidon, and Shimshon with Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel. Lomar Lecha, Yerubbaal Bedoro, Ki Moshe Bedoro, Bidon Bedoro, Ki Aaron Bedoro, Yiftach Bedoro, Ki Shmuel Bedoro. To teach us, Rabbi say that what? The leader of the generation is the leader of the generation. And we don't say that just because this leader of this generation is not as great as leaders of previous generation, doesn't mean they're not the leader. So meaning ultimately, look at again, Yerubbaal, that Gidon in his generation was the authority just like Moshe was the authority of his generation. And Shimshon was the authority in his generation just like Aaron was the authority in his generation. And Yiftach was the leader of his generation, just like Shmuel was in his generation. Even literally, again, a person who's not that great. But was appointed as a leader of the community. He is to be treated, again, like the greatest of the great. So I will say it's actually interesting. The way this is often understood is that when a person is put into a leadership position in the community, they have a certain level of siyata dishmaya, a certain level of divine assistance and providence to allow them to be successful in that sacred task. As such, what the Gemara is saying is, even if you look at that person, you say, hey, that person, that's what we got. That's what we have. Remember, previous generations, they had Moshe, they had Aaron, they had Yiftach, they had Shimshon, right? As the famous adage goes, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. I think that's a Maimar Chazal, right? So I'll say, so at the end of the day, the Gemara says, you've got what you've got. You've got what you've got, right? That's what you have. The leader you have is the leader you have, and you must respect him with the proper authority. Obviously, I will say, that means the leader has to be ra'i on some level, right? If chas v'shalom, a community or a people have a leader, and that leader is just not fit for the position, then obviously, again, that respect is not necessary. Well, the respect might not be there, but assuming that the person is a good person, a fit person, maybe he's not as great as previous generations. L'maisa yiftach bedoro kishmuel bedoro. Va'omer ubasa konim alavim va'al shovet asher b'yamim haim. And ultimately, again, the pasuk says, "You shall come to the kohen, to Levim, to the judge who you will have in your days." So that's obvious. Who are you going to go? You're going to go to a judge who's not in your days? You're obviously going to a judge who's in your days. Both say to teach you, and both say this is an incredible yesod in life. This is part of the more general mindset in Yiddishkeit, that don't spend your life pining for what you lack, but focus on maximizing what you have. That is true, and this is one of the major pillars of Yiddishkeit. Focus on maximizing what you have, what is at hand. Because you could spend a lifetime saying, oh, I wish I had this, or I wish it was like this, I wish I had leaders like this, I wish I had an inspirational personality like this, if only I had this, if only I had that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Go to the shofet you have. Just like you have to maximize the materialism you have to maximize the marriage you have to maximize the mishpacha you have to maximize the kochos you have to maximize the leadership you have as well. Is the leadership you have perfect? Probably not. Definitely not. But lamaisa, it's what you've got. It's what you've got. And I will say, by the way, you know what the irony is? Do you know that if you took a popularity poll, right? If you polled Moshe Rabbeinu's constituents during the desert, do you know what his polling numbers would be? I mean, not as low as the president, but I would say, but I would say they were pretty low. They were pretty low, right? Moshe Rabbeinu's popularity ratings were very, very, very low. It's, when people die is when they become beloved, right? But at the end of the day, so I just want to point out what the Gemara is saying is, don't fall into the trap of glorifying what was. Because in retrospect, it was so wonderful. All you need to do is open up the Chumash to see what the people thought of and how they treated Moshe Rabbeinu. They were wrong. But the Gemara is saying over here, focus on what you have. The leadership you have in your generation is the leadership you have. Maximize it. V'omer, we just have to finish the parak. I don't know what happens at the time. All right. V'omer, Bazis al Tomar, Ma haya shayamim harishonim hayu tovim me'ila. And the pasuk says, do not fall into the trap of saying, oh, the good old days, the good old days, the good old days, the good old days. Don't fall into the good old days trap. Because at the end of the day, life is not about reflecting and pining for the good old days, but rather, again, life is about maximizing what you have at your fingertips now, both in your personal life and now what the Gemara is expressing over here in a leadership construct as well. So the Gemara goes weiter. Natlu ma'osa, maklo ma'osa biyados. Remember again, let's finish the story. So Rabbi Yeshua accepts, right? He accepts. Rabbi Gamliel is right. He's the Nasi, he's in charge. He takes his money bag. He goes ahead and he takes his staff and he goes. Tan Rabbanon. Boss, listen to how beautiful this is. Kevan Shira Oso Amad Mikisa Venashka Rosho. When Rabbi Gamliel saw Rabbi Yeshua approach, Rabbi Gamliel stood up from his chair and he kissed him on his head. Amrlo, Shalom Alecha Rebbe B'Talmidi. Right, peace be upon you, my teacher, my student. Rebbe Shelimadeti Torah Berabim. Rebbe, because you have taught me Torah in public, right? Rabbi Gamliel learned Torah from Rabbi Yeshua. V'Talmidi Shani Gozer Alecha Gzira Va'ata Mekaima Kitalmid. And ultimately you are my student because I decrease something upon you and you listen. Ashrei Hadar Shagdolim Nishmayim Liktanim. Kavachomer Kitanim Ligdolim. Praiseworthy is the generation where the great Talmidei Chachamim even listen to the smaller ones. And Kavachomer, that the smaller Talmidei Chachamim should listen to the greater ones. Kavachomer, what do you mean Kavachomer? Chiyuva. Well, say obviously, Kitanim have to listen to Gidolim. That's obvious. Ela mitoch shagidolim nishmoim lekitanim nosim kitanim kabachor me'atzan. So both say we have to end. But what the Gemara is essentially saying is like this. In many respects, Rabbi Yoshua was the greater sage than Rabbi Gamliel. But Rabbi Gamliel was vested with the position of authority that Rabbi Yoshua did not have. So therefore, again, Rabbi Gamliel sees Rabbi Yoshua, he says, you are my Talmud and that you listen to me, but you're also my Rebbe, because you are the greatest Talmud Chacham. So the Gemara says, praiseworthy is the generation where the Katan, right, where the Gadol is willing to listen to the Katan. Because if the Gadol is willing to listen to the Katan, then what? The Katan will understand that, of course, he has to listen to the Gadol. Hajjan Allah, Amen. I will say Mazel Tov. We'll begin a new parak tomorrow. Shkoyach.